My niece called me an old lady in front of everyone at her wedding. I asked, "Where's your boyfriend?" I'm Jessica. I'm 33. On paper, my life looked neat. A law degree, a steady career at a respected firm, good friends, and a family that, at least most of the time, meant well. Off paper, I'd just come out of a 5-year engagement that collapsed when the man I thought I'd spend my life with turned out to be a serial cheater. That breakup left me bruised, embarrassed, and painfully aware of what other people, especially some in my family, were whispering about me behind polite smiles. One of those family members, a woman who would make the whole next year into a small storm, was Ami, my cousin's daughter. She's beautiful, young, and the kind of person who glides into a room and people look at her like she's the sun. Blonde hair, model proportions, a fashion degree, though she didn't use it much, a husband-to-be with a gleaming job in tech. She'd been coddled and spoiled since childhood. Whatever Ami wanted, Ami got. And that entitlement extended to mocking other people when it served her, especially me. When Adam, my ex, cheated, a lot of people in the family were sympathetic, but a few were not. Ami was loudly not. She had a knack for turning people's private pain into other people's entertainment, and the night she chose to make me the butt of a joke lives with me still. Ami's engagement party was in the barn at my grandparents' farm, the sort of starlit rustic venue that shows up in lifestyle mags. I'd been invited. My mother pushed me to go. "You need to be around people," she said. "It'll be good for you." I wanted to believe her, so I put on a new dress, did my hair, and went. For the first part of the evening, things were okay. People circulated, glasses clinked. Ami and her fiancé Jack were the center of attention, obviously drunk on attention and cheap champagne. Then, as people were making their way to the speeches, Ami picked me out of the crowd with that practiced smile of hers. You know the kind, sweet in a way that is precisely calibrated for effect. She raised her glass, the room hushed. "Everyone, I want to make a special toast," she squealed, "to Jack and to my favorite Aunt Jessica, the unfortunate, the unlucky, and then with the theatrical wave, the old lady." Every head turned. Laughter crackled, at first a little nervous, then coalescing into full-blooded amusement. Jack joined in. Even some relatives I expected to defend me smiled in the way people smile when gossip is tasty and the spectacle continues. I remember the hot flush that rose through my chest, the immediate want to disappear, the way my legs felt like errant anchors. I left the party the way you do when the ground drops away under you, fast, ungraceful, trying not to scream. Outside, under the weak sodium lamp of the farm driveway, my tears were big and angry. Of all the humiliations, this was the one that cut the quickest. I'd already been stung by Adam's betrayal. To be made into a public joke by my niece, by family members who should have had a baseline of decency, felt like salt poured into a raw wound. Jack found me outside. If you told me 5 months earlier that Jack would be one of the people who reached for me, I would have laughed. But there he was, tie undone, sincerity in his voice. He apologized not once, but several times. He called Amy out, clumsily at first, then more earnestly. He told me the things that, amid the humiliation, I needed to hear. That her words were cruel and unnecessary, that they were drunk and in poor taste, and that he was embarrassed. He asked me to return so he could apologize in front of everyone. I didn't go back. I was still raw. I drove home and sat on my bed for a long time, the dress still on, every laugh from the party echoing in my mind. My mother asked me to come back to the family home for a while. My office gave me a few days of leave. For 2 months, I slept in the small guest room at my parents'. Family life was awkward at first. Some relatives apologized when no one was looking. Others made the party into a story they told with the moral on Amy's side. Well, she didn't know better, or she doesn't mean it. Often the defense of a child or the pretty is willful blindness, masquerading as forgiveness. Amy, meanwhile, behaved as if nothing had happened. She was aloof or pleasant, depending on the room. No direct apology. The family, eager to keep the unity that benefits them, mostly let it ride. I felt boxed in by their kindness and bruised by their passivity. Jack kept popping up unexpectedly at the house. He'd been helping with venue tours and cake samples as part of the wedding planning. He tried again to reach out. Not grand gestures, just kindness and presence. Slowly, cautiously, I began to see there was a man behind the handsome face. Thoughtful, apologetic, and genuinely uncomfortable with entitlement. We started spending time together in small pockets, running errands, sharing coffees, talking late on the back porch. The first weeks, I refused everything beyond conversation, but he was persistent without pressure. He listened about Adam in a way people usually don't, not to offer platitudes, but to understand how the betrayal felt and what being publicly humiliated did to me. There's a peculiar kind of intimacy that comes from someone apologizing, not just for their words, but for the cowardice they saw in the way the world treated you. Jack was sincere. The more I got to know him, the more I thought perhaps I could trust someone again. Not everything healed. The whole family dynamic remained messy. Ami took to sabotaging small things, rolling her eyes during conversations, puncturing my attempts at normalcy with backhanded concern. Once she even left passive-aggressive notes, "It must be hard going to weddings alone," pinned where everyone would find them. The idea was to stress and ostracize me into apologizing or shrinking away, to prove that her insults was just teasing and I am the problem for taking offense. When the wedding date came closer, there was a flurry of last-minute planning. For reasons that now seem transparent, Ami started to say she didn't want me at the wedding. She told family members she found it awkward. She painted me as a sad figure who would bring up bad memories. My mother, infuriatingly, negotiated. Come, but don't make a scene. It was the family's compromise. I felt like an exhibit in someone else's museum, allowed to attend only if I behaved like one of the props. Jack, who had already been pressured by Ami at times, told me he wanted me there. He said it would mean something to him to see me walk into the room with my head held up. No theatrics, he promised, just you, please. For reasons I can't fully explain, I decided not to give Ami that victory. I bought a dress, fixed my hair, and went to the wedding. Ami's wedding was a swirl of blush tones, a band playing covers of summer songs, and guests sipping champagne. I kept my distance at first, letting my fingers twist nervously around the stem of my glass. My presence was noted, murmurs, sideways glances, the odd whisper. It stung, but I'd learned to expect it. Midway through the reception, Ami was at the center again. Resplendent, radiant, the picture of the bride who has everything. The family was beaming, friends were toasting, someone had made a speech about new beginnings. Then, a small, delicious moment presented itself. Ami, who had always been the careful queen of the room, paused and turned to the crowd with a bright, supervisory smile. And now, I want to thank everybody, especially those who supported Jack and me through everything. The microphone made her voice bigger. People leaned in. I watched Ami's eyes scan the room for approval, for the right reaction. Something in me, some small, private part of me that had been hurt to the bone, decided to answer Ami's theatrics, not by loudness, but with a single pointed question. I stood, walked forward, and with the calmness I didn't know I had, I leaned just over the edge of the top table and asked loud enough for everyone to hear, "Where's your boyfriend?" The room froze in mid-applause. For a beat that felt like a sliver of eternity, no one moved. Amy's smile faltered. The band stopped playing the string quartet. Someone coughed. Then the reaction came in waves. Some people snickered because it sounded so brazen and theatrical. Others looked shocked, trying to process the social earthquake that had just occurred. Amy's face shifted from confusion to fury. Jack stood up like a lighthouse erupting, not angrily, but with a kind of stunned tenderness. He moved toward me and simply put his hand in mine. It was a small gesture, but it said everything. Amy sputtered. "What, Jessica, you can't." She was flustered in a way I'd never seen her be, unprepared, exposed, vulnerable in the face of someone she expected to ostracize. She had been the one to weaponize other people's opinions, to turn the room into a stage where she could throw me off the set. I didn't need to shout or throw stones. The one question was the whole point. The meaning was clear. She had built an image, a life, a perfect pairing with Jack. But in that perfect world, she had attacked and humiliated me. That constructed perfection felt fragile when observed under a simple social microscope. "Where's your boyfriend? Did he stand with her when she mocked someone publicly? Or did he avoid noticing the cruelty that made him comfortable?" If Jack had been a complacent follower, he would have smiled, shrugged, and mouthed and ignored her. Because that is what comfortable people do. Instead, as he squeezed my hand, he looked at Amy with a kind of sorrow that seemed more acute than anger. "I'm here," he said softly, and then louder for the whole room to hear. "And I'm sorry." Amy's composure cracked. In a matter of seconds, the entire rehearsal of her life slipped. The rehearsed insults, the cultivated superiority, the expectation of applause. She stormed from the room. The band resumed with the shaky version of the first dance. Conversation resumed, but now with tiny fissures in the polished veneer. Outside the hall later that night, people asked me why I'd done it. Some family members were furious. They said, "You could have handled it privately." Others, quietly, told me it was the bravest thing they'd seen. Jack found me in the parking lot. He took me in his arms and apologized for everything he'd done by omission. He whispered, "You didn't steal anything. You simply asked the question that needed asking." Amy cut off contact. She accused me in group messages of stealing attention and of being petty. Some relatives tried to mediate, but here's the thing about entitlement. It doesn't like being exposed. Over the next months, the family dynamic shifted. Because I had refused to apologize for being myself and for defensively protecting what dignity I had left, many family members who'd been silent began admitting quietly that they'd been uncomfortable with the way Amy treated me. The most surprising people were those who hadn't spoken up earlier. Aunt Margot, who'd once told me I was too sensitive, hugged me and said, "I'm so sorry I didn't step in." Others offered small apologies over brunches or calls. Jack and I continued seeing each other. He left the engagement in emotional shambles. broken promises, the collapse of the public performance that had been their relationship. In the end, he chose to be with me, not because I ambushed him at a table, but because he saw the moral landscape differently. He'd started the apology sequence months earlier when he pulled me aside at the engagement party and told me he was sorry. That small seed grew. We married 12 months later in a quiet ceremony. No barn, no fanfare, just close friends, my parents, Jack's mother and father who had quietly supported him in accepting responsibility, and not a single person who'd weaponized their social power to hurt me. Amy didn't attend. She said she wanted to make a statement. She wanted to be strong and independent. She also made a social media post hinting that I'd been the villain. It didn't feel like a loss. Update 1, a month later. People kept asking if I regretted my "where's your boyfriend" moment. Regret didn't feel like the right word. People assume the moral choice is always to be polite and small. Sometimes the moral choice is to name the thing that everyone else is skirting around. I didn't ask that question to humiliate. I asked it to puncture an illusion. If family unity depends on enabling cruelty, that unity is a lie. Update 2, 6 months later. Some relatives made awkward attempts to repair the relationship between Ami and me. Christmas cards, passive texts about healing, etc. I replied only when I wanted to, and I kept boundaries. But best repair came from behavior, not apologies. My parents stood by me. A few cousins who'd been quiet became quietly protective. Meanwhile, Ami's social media life became a little noisier and a little lonelier. She pushed friendships away by refusing to reflect on anything. Those who'd once lined up to praise her started to notice the pattern, a tendency to mock, to exclude. People who get what they want by punching down seldom keep the most valuable things: trust, respect, and genuine friendships. Update 3, 1 year later. Jack and I are married. Our wedding was small and sweet. Several family members who'd been on the fence came. Ami did not. That absence felt honest. Life after humiliation is a slow project of rebuilding your sense of self. I'm rebuilding. I'm dating, then falling in love, then learning to trust again. I became partner track at my firm. I took up running. I learned to say small no's and practice radical self-care. I write, I cook. I let the quiet beginnings of a life with someone good unfurl. Update 4, 2 years later. Ami reached out to me once. A short message. Can we talk? I read it, left it unread for a week, then texted back, not now. That was less cruelty than protection. People must learn the hard lessons themselves. If she ever shows real accountability, we'll talk. In the meantime, I have no interest in re-entering a cycle where I make myself small to soothe another's ego. I learned how thin the paper is between social performance and kindness. I learned that people will often opt for the easier path, a joke, a laugh, a cheap applause, even when it means humiliating someone. But I also learned that humiliation is a terrible instrument that always leaves marks on the wielder. I learned that dignity is a quiet, stubborn thing. You don't always have to win loudly. Sometimes the most piercing victories are small. Refusing to be shrunk, staying in your skin, protecting your dignity without seeking vengeance. I learned to ask questions I needed to ask, even at the risk of social awkwardness. Where's Your Boyfriend was not about exposure for its own sake. It was an honest test. Are we going to allow cruelty to pass as charm? Are we going to pretend that it's fine to publicly denigrate someone because they are vulnerable? When people see you refuse to be complicit in your own erasure, some will be angry, but others will stand up. Quietly at first, then defiantly.